This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. It has been another violent day in Egypt as protesters calling for a revolution remain on the streets, and the government has made some concessions but continues to hang on. Let's take a look at the latest. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak has named a vice president for the first time in his 30-year presidency. The latest numbers show at least 74 have been killed, 2,000 injured in 5 days of protests. The Egyptian army is backing the government-imposed curfew. And in this country, President Obama's national security team met for 2 hours today. We have a series of reports from around the world tonight, beginning with Mark Strassman in Cairo, where it is already early Sunday.
Ross, it's 1:30 in the morning here in Cairo, and yet down on the street behind me, they're still out there. Thousands of protesters defying a curfew, even defying soldiers in tanks. They're staying put to say that Egypt's president must go. In Cairo's Liberation Square, rage fueled revolt. Again today, the fed-up rose up in a celebration of defiance. By the thousands, they shouted one message: Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak must go. I'm not leaving here until Mubarak is wiped off the face of the earth, this man said. For Mubarak, it's unprecedented repudiation. His presidency's in crisis. And the faces of protesters show a passion and confidence that keeps growing. So today, two big changes. To calm Cairo's streets, soldiers replaced police officers. The crowds only grew. As tanks rumbled in, dozens of people hopped aboard for the ride of a lifetime, theirs and the Mubarak regime's.
This really is a critical moment. The crowd is growing more agitated, more upset. There's an army tank that has now moved into the center of the square. The tank is here presumably to clear it. We're past the curfew now, and everyone here is trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
This soldier pleaded for crowds to make way. No luck. Senior commanders have pledged not to use violence. But the police have not been so careful. Clashes with protesters have spilled blood from Alexandria to Cairo. Dozens have been killed, including this man, carried out of an area where protesters had tried to storm Egypt's interior ministry, and police opened fire. Rabab Al-Mahdi's a street-level organizer. She says Egyptians have had it.
They're doing this because they feel that this is their country, this is what they have to do.
To soften their anger, Mubarak's second big change today was political. Two major appointments. Omar Suleiman, Egypt's intelligence chief, was sworn in as vice president, the first time Mubarak has ever had one. And Ahmed Shafiq, former aviation chief, became prime minister. But not enough to many protesters, as Mohammed El-Baradei, Nobel Peace Prize winner and a growing voice in this revolt, told Al Jazeera.
Mr. Mubarak, as their regime, has to go, and we have to have a new start.
Into the night, protesters demanded that new start. And with each day of these protests, Mubarak's grip on power looks less sure. Without police on the streets, it's a scary night across much of Cairo. Armed residents guard their own neighborhoods, but there are reports of widespread looting, even looting at Egypt's National Museum, home of the King Tut treasures. But soldiers beat back the looters. Russ?
Mark, what was it like for you to be in the square when those tanks rolled through?
Well, right before the tanks, Russ, we'd heard a lot of gunfire. Then the tanks showed up. People were scared. A ripple of fear raced through the crowd. No one knew whether the tanks were going to open fire on the people. And then it became clear the answer was no. They weren't going to open fire, and everybody relaxed and stayed relaxed. I mean, as a moment, that was the day's game changer. And as we were leaving, one of the protesters patted me on the back and said, in English, "Welcome to Egypt." Russ?
Mark Strassman in Cairo, thank you very much. A big question in this crisis has been, why is all this taking place now? Well, an annual survey by the Pew Research Center may help provide at least a part of that answer. The survey shows in 2006, 42% of Egyptians were dissatisfied with the way things were going in their country. Following a steady climb, last year, that number had reached 69%. Elizabeth Palmer now in Cairo has more on why now.
It might have begun as a youth movement, but take a look at this crowd now. There are religious conservatives protesting, housewives, students, senior citizens, all of them united against a common enemy, Hosni Mubarak, the former fighter pilot who rigged elections to keep a lockhold on power for 30 years. He squandered billions on palaces, a pampered military, and an inner circle of family and cronies, while ignoring the citizens' most basic needs.
People, they're so separated and segregated from those who make the decisions that the Egyptian people are strangers in their own country.
It's a cruel country for the 16 million people who eke out a life on less than $2 a day. Almost half of Egypt's 80 million people don't even know how to read. And those who do, legions of dynamic young people who worked hard to get an education, find there is nowhere to use it.
Many of the street vendors you see in Egypt may have college degrees, but they have no hope of finding a job, no hope of really meeting their ambitions in life. And these are the people who are now taking their grievances out on the streets.
To top it all off, the world has seen the brutality of the security forces this week. Well, it's not reserved for demonstrators. Abuse and torture are the Egyptian police's stock in trade. Hosni Mubarak, who is now 82 years old, has clearly been blindsided by this open challenge to his authority.
I'm here to congratulate them for finally standing up for their rights.
Once the people decided enough was enough, it only took them 4 days to shake a rotten system to the core. It's one thing to shake the system, quite another to dismantle it or reform it. And tonight there's absolutely no plan anywhere that indicates how the government or the army might go forward with that. Russ?
Elizabeth Palmer in Cairo. Thank you. These shockwaves from the Egyptian protests are spreading far and wide across the Arab world. Supporters rallied today in Tunisia, where protests toppled a long-entrenched regime earlier this month. Demonstrators also turned out today in the capital of Yemen, as well as on the streets of Jordan. As you can imagine, it's been a very busy day at the White House and beyond on the diplomatic front. Our chief White House correspondent, Chip Reid, joins us now with the latest from there. Chip, good evening.
Well, good evening, Russ. The president has been closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Egypt, but some analysts say there's not a lot he can do to control what happens next. At the White House today, President Obama met with his national security team for an update on the situation in Egypt. Following the meeting, the president's new chief of staff, Bill Daley, had only a brief comment.
I think it's a very fluid situation. The president's been very clear on it, and we look forward to seeing some stability and peace on the streets.
But other White House officials say the president reiterated to his team that his focus is on ending the violence, supporting the rights of the Egyptian people, and advancing political reform in Egypt. It's the same message the president conveyed to President Mubarak Friday evening in a 30-minute phone call. But despite Mubarak's close relationship with the United States over 3 decades and $1.5 billion a year in U.S. aid, President Obama has little control over what Mubarak does next, according to Middle East analyst John Alterman.
I don't think there are many people in the world who Hosni Mubarak is listening to right now, and I certainly don't think he's curious what the Americans think he should do.
Whether it's effective or not, though, the White House says the administration plans to keep up the pressure on Hosni Mubarak. Russ?
Chip Reid at the White House. Thanks. Despite President Mubarak's statement last night that he is on the side of freedom, the Egyptian government earlier this week shut down the internet and most cell phone service. Those moves are having an impact on this side of the world as well, as Elaine Quijano tells us.
At the Egyptian coffee shop in Queens, New York, where the developments in Egypt dominate the discussions, shop owner Labib Salama is worried. He hasn't been able to reach his 22-year-old nephew Peter, who lives in Egypt, for days.
Yeah, we don't know how it goes. He could be killed, or could be hurt. It could be somebody catch him.
In the wake of the protests this week, the Egyptian government Friday took an extraordinary step, cutting off nearly all internet access and shutting down cell phone service. Internet traffic to and from Egypt built throughout the day Thursday. Then just before 12:30 a.m. Cairo time Friday, traffic across 80 Egyptian internet providers abruptly stopped. Shortly afterwards, cell phones went out as well. The country had been pulled off the grid. And one possible consequence? The lack of communication may have driven even more people into the streets.
It magnifies the chaos because people don't know whether their friends and family are safe, and they don't know whether the regime is going to last on Monday or whether it'll be collapsed.
In Washington, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton quickly decried the move.
We urge the Egyptian authorities to allow peaceful protests and to reverse the unprecedented steps it has taken to cut off communications.
International journalists have been restricted as well. Cameras have been confiscated, and getting information out has been difficult. By 8 p.m. Saturday in Egypt, some internet connections had been restored, and one Egyptian journalist resumed his Twitter feed, reporting, "I'm online again." And internet service appears to be coming back slowly to parts of Egypt in a limited fashion. Cell phone service appears to be coming back as well. Today, 2 of Egypt's main mobile service providers were back up and running. Russ?
Elaine Quijano here in New York. Thank you so much.